We do not have to know this for the test either. So we're going to start where we left off yesterday talking about atoms. I'm going to go back here. And we talked about the parts of the atoms, and we became familiar with different parts of the atoms and certain things about them. Today we're going to talk about what happens when atoms combine, okay? So atoms combine and they form what? We know this from Unit 1, which is on your test on Monday. Molecules. Good. Atoms combine to form molecules, and they also form what's called compounds. Compounds, when they form, they're held together by what? What holds compounds together? They can form that. And there's different kinds of these combinations. Some involve sharing electrons. Some involve transferring electrons. Anybody know what forms when atoms combine and share electrons? Nobody? See why I knew this was new. They're called bonds. Who's heard of bonds? Correct. So when two or more atoms combine, they form bonds and what's called compounds. Or they make bonds between each other and form compounds. So let's talk about these bonds, okay? The first thing I want you to know is when atoms combine, what's really combining is electrons. So they are utilizing a bond, or they're forming bonds between their electrons, and that's how they form a compound. So who could give me an example of a compound? Yesterday we gave examples of elements.
Carbon monoxide. Oh, Melanie.
Melanie, carbon monoxide is a compound of carbon and oxygen, and they are sharing or transferring electrons. They're forming bonds with their electrons. What else is an example of a compound? Water is a compound, okay? So let's talk about the different types of bonds. So in this bond, and here you see, there is a bond between sodium and chloride. And what's happening, if you look at these dogs, is there is a bone here and a bone here, and then in the end, he's got two bones. So what happened between these dogs? They look like they fought, and one of them won, and look at the diagram. If I was to tell you, look at this diagram, we don't know if they got mad, if they got lost. What do we know? Because that could be a test question. One took a bone from another. Yes? Because they started with a bone each, and one took a bone. So when one atom takes a bone, steals, transfers, gives to another atom, anybody know what type of bond that's called? Nope, the other one. It is somewhat. It's called ionic. An ionic bond, an atom either gives an electron to another atom, steals an electron from another atom, or what they call in the nice way is transfers an electron to the other atom. Here's the tricky part, okay? This is vocab up to now. Everything we've learned is vocab. This requires some thinking. So here was the dog with one bone, the dog with the other. This dog that ends up with two bones ends up with a negative charge. So the atom that gains an electron becomes what? Negative or positive? It sounds like you want it. Correct. If it gains an electron, so that dog gained a bone, he becomes negatively charged. The one that loses an electron becomes positively charged. So it seems like it would be backwards, so you have to learn it that way. An atom that gains an electron becomes negatively charged. An atom that loses an electron becomes positively charged. So now we have another type of bond. In this one, you see that what are the dogs doing? We don't know that they're fighting. We're going to say they're sharing because each dog is holding the bone that each one had. So we call that covalent bonds. Think of the word co. Sounds like a partnership, right? They share electrons between two atoms. Because that's a partnership, it's considered one of the strongest types of bonds. In an ionic bond, since one took it, the other one's still trying to get it back, so it's like a weak bond. A covalent bond is strong and hard to break. That partnership is happy. This right here is a picture of a perfect covalent bond, a perfect sharing of electrons. Sometimes, look what's happening here. There's a pull on one end. So one guy has the bone, the other guy's sharing, but one is pulling stronger. This is what's called a polar covalent bond. Electrons, since we see the word covalent, what do we know is happening between the atoms? We know they're combining, and how? If it's covalent, they share. The share, though, is uneven. One is pulling more than the other. And an example of a polar covalent bond is hydrogen bonds. They share unevenly. Another example is right here, which you don't have to know these compounds. So right here you can put a line across the compound names because you don't have to know any of those compound names. Now, if you see a covalent bond and you see a charge at the end, you see this word charge, you know it's polar covalent. So if they're sharing and you see a charge on one end, it's polar covalent. If they're sharing and there's no charge, it's covalent.